right, listen up, Rotogrinders. It's the ownership report for week number 9 in the National Football League. My name is Chris Gimino, projected ownership analyst for Rotogrinders, and joining me to go over the numbers, Dan Gaspar, Mr. Tuttle 05. Tuttle, we don't have half the news we need, so are you sure we should even do this show right now? Should we just wait until tomorrow?
Yeah, we could just wait.
All right, tell the producer. We're gonna put it on time. No, I guess we have to talk about what we know right now, but there is definitely a lot of uncertainty out there. Tuttle, give me the lay of the land. What's going on with the quarterbacks? What's going on with the other injuries out there? Like, how are we supposed to make heads or tails of our lineups in the building process tonight when we've got a bunch of stuff that we're probably not going to know until at least midnight?
Yeah, and I think the main situation you're talking about is Kyler. Kyler and D-Hop. D-Hop seems more doubtful than Kyler. But even Kyler, I think, seems fairly unlikely to play. I guess we'll see. That's the big one, but there certainly are other injury situations to monitor too. Do you have other one on top of your head that I'm missing?
Okay, so there's a couple of things that are out there just sort of laden, a lot of questionable tags, right? Like if you want to talk about at the quarterback position, Tua is in a good spot against Houston. So depending on how that shakes out, if for some reason we're looking at Jacoby Brissett, that's stupid and something we have to deal with all at the same time. You've got, how are the Packers going to operate without Aaron Rodgers? How is that game going to operate? That's not something we're necessarily waiting for, but it's certainly something we don't exactly know how it's going to shake out. You mentioned not only Murray, you get Colt McCoy at quarterback, but then you've got to deal with the receiver situations. No AJ Green, also no DeAndre Hopkins could mean that we're talking about Christian Kirk and Rondell Moore as potential options on the cheap out there in the land. So we'll go through position by position and get a look at the projected player popularity as we currently have it. But I think a lot's going to change before lineup lock tomorrow. One thing that I don't think is going to change much at all when you start the quarterback position total, we're going to be looking at Lamar Jackson as very popular for very good reason on DraftKings. And I think that across the landscape, you're going to see him owned on most of the sites here. I think he's a fantastic play as well. I don't know how I'm going. If I make 3 lineups, just sort of the medium to high stakes like I usually do, I don't see how I'm going to avoid Lamar Jackson in one of them. Talk about that. Is he going to be into the 20% range, or can I get away with stealing him somewhere 15 to 20?
So he might get into that 20% range. Just when you think of lineup construction, he's the easiest guy to fit on DraftKings by far. Josh Allen's up there, but people typically don't like to play quarterbacks when it's expected to be a blowout. So that I think will shy people away from wanting to spend up on Josh Allen, which makes him a pretty strong tournament option, but that's a different story. But yeah, I think Lamar could see his ownership pushed up. The other factor going here is that Mahomes is now going to probably be playing in a less competitive game, kind of similar to Josh Allen, I guess. And it's just going to be a really slow-paced game too. So, yeah, Jackson, I think, is pretty easily going to be the highest owned quarterback. And I could definitely see the 20% range for sure.
Vikings tend to facilitate bigger games from time to time. Not every single time they go out there on the field, but if you're looking for a game that definitely has that parabolic looking upside, if Cousins gets it going and Lamar gets it going, they don't have, they're running out like the old folks home in the backfield in Baltimore these days. So it's pretty much Lamar's legs and Lamar's arm. And that just creates a massive, massive, massive opportunity for him to do it all by himself, or you can find correlation plays. Certainly on the other side of Minnesota, you've got some concentrated share there. Looks like a good game to attack all in all, even if there's ownership attached to some of the guys in this game. Now, you mentioned Josh Allen. Despite the high price tag, you will see ownership on him simply because of the matchup against Jacksonville. That's going to allure people for sure. Mahomes has struggled, no question about it. But one of the things with him struggling is you're seeing the price tag drop on a few of the guys, not necessarily Tyreek Hill, but you'll see a cheaper Mecole Hardman, you'll see a cheaper Travis Kelce out there, and Mahomes is certainly someone that people haven't lost faith in entirely. He'll be owned. Okay, so after that, question marks start to fly real fast because you've got cheap guys that I don't know if they'll rise up in ownership enough. Jordan Love, some of the guys that we mentioned earlier, even someone scrub a dub like Tyrod Taylor coming back at 5K. I have him at 2% now. Is he going to rise up? Probably not, but maybe we'll see. Who else do you think is going to be owned here on the slate?
Yeah, I think Jordan Love is the most interesting for me in terms of ownership. People love to play the low price quarterbacks that are actually going to play. At least assuming they have some sort of competency, which we don't really know about Love, but the assumption is that he'll use his legs a little bit, which is another factor that people love to buy into. I mentioned it before, like Packers play at such a slow pace. I think the slowest pace in the league, bottom two, even when trailing by 7+. Like we saw when they played Thursday night, pulled out the win against Arizona. We saw them play super conservatively, even with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. And I fully expect that's the approach they will take with Jordan Love under center as well. So I think he'll catch ownership. I would not be surprised if he even got close to like the double-digit range in ownership. I don't think he's the greatest play, but at the same time, you could definitely see a lineup construction thing where all quarterbacks kind of plateau around the 25-point mark. He gets you 15 to 20, and that's enough to end up being optimal just because of how lineup construction works. So if I'm playing Love, it's definitely more of, hey, he makes the rest of my lineup work than, hey, I actually like him as a play.
I think a guy people would probably want to get involved with is Tua, but we've got the questionable tag with an injury here. Jalen Hurts screwed up last week, basically, for lack of a better term. Didn't get the job done. I think that's going to help keep his ownership in check at 6.7 versus the Chargers, who are also starting to become, a bit of a run funnel. I mean, I guess, defense as a whole, not somebody that we're overly excited about, but just the running game seems to be a place to attack them more so than through the air this season. Although I did see Sam. I don't know. I didn't check the injury report, but Samuel was down last week. They had some injuries in the secondary, so maybe that softens it up a little bit. But Hurts is somebody definitely who's got upside if you believe that they can get it done here in this spot. Dak Prescott is probably the guy that I think has the best chance of being owned above his projection. Versus Denver, not a particularly appealing matchup. What do you think of Dak here? Do you think he's going to be popular?
I don't think he'll be popular. Coming off injury, you said it yourself, the matchup's not overly appealing. He's a guy that you could eye up for tournaments for sure, but I don't think he'll be popular. The Hurts thing you mentioned is interesting. Like, you don't want him when he's playing with the lead, right? We found that out. We kind of knew it, and that was kind of just reiterated last week. They are currently 2-point underdogs, I think. So maybe he'll get some more opportunity. You mentioned the rushing thing, and that's more of just like a philosophy too with the Chargers offense, really, or defense, I should say, than a personnel thing at this point. They're just inviting teams to run on them. That could theoretically be good for Hurts if he runs the ball a little bit more himself. And people, again, love the rushing floor he provides. So Hurts is the guy that I could see getting a little bit more ownership. I don't think Dak will be owned. I think probably that 5% range, which is where you have him right now.
A couple other names to throw out there before we get on to the other positions. You've got, Burrow, who is against Cleveland. I mean, I suppose it's a spot where a double stack with Burrow could get the job done. I think people will tend to lean in that direction because you've got a little bit of a cheaper option with Higgins to pair up with Jamar Chase. So that's certainly something that could, but again, he's 6.8. It's not, I wouldn't call it cheap. Not my favorite thing in the world overall, but I would say that people are probably going to turn to it some. Daniel Jones is 5.6. And then who are his wide receivers this week, Tuttle? I think that's another question. Is Galladay going to get out there and run around and get exercise?
And is Tony good to go? Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. We know Dante Pettis is no good no more, right? At least I'm pretty sure. Yeah, he's officially out. Sterling Shepard's officially out. Galladay's questionable. Tony does not have an injury designation, it looks like, even though being limited. I mean, I'm all about that, honestly. Daniel Jones and Kadarius Toney, I can get behind that for sure.
Evan Ingram, as we know, is never going to happen. So that is just
I keep trying to make it happen. He got a touchdown last game.
Whatever. I mean, let's say this. There's plenty of cheap options to go to at tight end this week, or rather than to try to gamble on the Evan Ingram never going to happen bandwagon. Okay, Derek Carr, 5.9. Surprisingly effective this year. It's certainly at generating yardage, but now tragic news out of Las Vegas with Henry Ruggs no longer with the team. You've got Darren Waller still. You've got Hunter Renfrow, whom I don't believe is going to be in line for as much of a jump in targets as I seem to think a lot of other people are projecting. What's going on here with Derek Carr? Can you use him? I think the price tag and stack affordability is going to leave him at least 4 to 6% owned.
Yeah, you mentioned, I think also just his targets projecting well. You mentioned Renfro is getting kind of a hot projection in some places. I tend to agree with you. Like maybe you'll see a tiny bump, but it's not going to be like he doesn't see a huge role change with Ruggs gone. And we have to remember Ruggs was not eating a lot of targets anyway.
15%.
As somebody who who was playing Ruggs in tournament lineups on a weekly basis, it's not like he was eating a bunch of targets. So I like Carr. And I think he's a solid play. And I do think just because like Waller on FanDuel specifically will be popular, but even he could catch some ownership on DraftKings. I think that and buy it in and of itself will increase his ownership a little bit. But also then you mentioned just the cost or the affordability of the stack. Brian Edwards is only 4,100 on DraftKings. Renfro is he still 48? Something like that.
Yes.
Possibly more. Yeah, 48. So yeah, I like Carr. And I think he's a strong stacking candidate.
Okay, so when you look at the landscape here, probably maximum 2 guys who are owned enough to even care about. That's my opinion on how this is going to shake out. Maybe we'll see a third guy sneak up to 10%, but I doubt it. Do you have a particular favorite of the guys outside of Jackson and Allen?
Justin Herbert, maybe not to sneak up ownership wise. Is that what you're talking about?
I'm talking about just in general, a guy you think could get it done with high ceiling.
General guy you could get it done with high ceiling, Justin Herbert for sure. Would be, and he seems like somebody we tout every week because it is like he's one of the guys that does have the ceiling. He has the weaponry as well, and it's just kind of a matter of if he can get it done. And I know there's been some complaints about how the offense has kind of turned into not as much downfield as we originally expected, and as we have seen at times with Mike Williams. But Herbert is like he's somebody you just have to keep in your tournament pool pretty much on a weekly basis.
All right, let's get into the running back position. I think we've got a couple of different things to talk about here. The first thing that we need to talk about is we no longer have, well, first of all, Tennessee's not on the slate, but we no longer have, Derrick Henry as in the mix. We might get Christian McCaffrey back. And when we talk about guys like Henry and McCaffrey, we're talking about the kind of guys who you're going to see on Thrive Fantasy. Come prop up on Thrive Fantasy this football season total. It's a daily fantasy sports and esports app for player props. With Thrive, you can eliminate the countless hours of research and focus on just the top tier athletes like your McCaffreys, like your Derrick Henrys that have the biggest impact on the game. Choose 10 of the 20 available player props to build your lineup. Each prop is going to be assigned a value for both the over and the under based on how likely it is to hit. Hit the most props and rack up the most points to win your share of the prize pool. Use the promo code Grinders and get a 100% instant deposit bonus up to $250, plus free entry into their featured contest. Download the Thrive Fantasy app on the App Store or the Play Store or by visiting the website. Sign up and prop up today. Okay, running back position total. Just as well as I do that this week is a little bit lackluster when it comes to the spot here. Looks like Eckler and Elliott are the guys that we're projecting right now towards the top of the ownership ranks. Is that something that you see as likely to happen, or is there somebody else down in this pool that's going to become the absolute most owned guy?
I think there is an absolute most owned guy. I really don't. The Kamara ownership was interesting to me. We have him at 8.5, but like he's not been that good, and you have the quarterback question marks too. So I understand it. And I like if he does raise in ownership, I don't think he's going to be the guy that jumps out as extreme chalk. I just think you could argue that he will settle in that 15% range. But no, there's really is no clear standout at the running back position. Gaskin was the guy that kind of is the low priced guy that's probably going to catch ownership. And even you can argue how great of a play he is, or how, there's nothing this week. I keep mumbling, but there's nothing really that great here.
Yeah, go ahead and smash that refresh button. I put in an update just before we got on air here to get Eckler and Elliott a little bit towards the top. All those guys you mentioned still near the top of the list here. Cordell Patterson is somebody that I expect to probably get a little bit of run here. But, it's even worse than my last update, the one that you were just looking at, Tuttle. Like, I think I condensed the ownership down more than I have in any week this season outside of Eckler and Elliott. So I think maybe Nick Chubb against Cincinnati probably ends up as somebody that people can feel pretty comfortable with. The matchup is certainly not prohibitive. And if you look what happened with the Jets last week, I don't think anything is beyond the Cincinnati defense at this point if they're going to give up 400 to Mike White. But anyway, Nick Chubb, certainly with no Odell Beckham, the way that offense is going to run, I do think that he'll be pretty popular. Do you feel confident in this? And this is something that usually you've been touting when he's low owned. Can you play him when he's a little bit chalkier?
You can. It's not the most fun spot in the world, and we saw last week kind of why. He did not get there. Got his touches. They did mix Dearness Johnson in a little bit more than I thought they would as a pass catching back, and that's kind of been his downfall. When he's just not much of a pass catching back, Chubb, so that certainly hurts his floor quite a bit. But yeah, he's a decent price. But I agree with you. He's one of those guys. If he's chalk, probably better just to fade him. If he's low owned, that's the time that you want to jump on him.
Yeah, I struggle with this one. I do think I can see it happening as far as him being somebody you need to win a tournament. But at the same time, I do feel that Chubb's the kind of player that I would prefer to not have a bunch of popularity when I go ahead and put him in my tournament lineups if I can help it. Particularly on DraftKings, where you said he's not always involved in the passing game. Gaskin is the guy who's involved in the passing game. The matchup's beautiful. The ownership's going to be pretty high on that, but I wouldn't fault anyone for wanting to go there. How about Devontae Booker against the Raiders? Revenge, if you will. 5.9, the price tag is not that great, but the workload is pretty much as good as you can ask for. He's not great as a player, but I mean, again, are we really fearful of this matchup against the Raiders?
No, and what they don't have, again, I have to look at the injury report, but like, do they even have an RB2 this week? The Giants, like, he's going to get so much work. And I'm
Elijah Penny.
Yeah, they don't like him. And yeah, he'll be higher owned. I was looking at FanDuel real quick. He'll be a little bit higher owned on FanDuel, which I believe is what we have here. I think he's a good play. I do. So if you're like, I talked about Gaskin a little bit, and we still have Gaskin projected for more ownership than Booker, and I think that's probably how it's going to go. But you look at a guy whose workload could go any which way, which is Gaskin, to one that has just a very, very solid role, and it's not going anywhere. That's Booker. So like, yeah, give me the guy that's going to be lower owned that has the more solidified role for sure.
A guy whose role has surprisingly gone somewhere a little bit is Dalvin Cook. And what I mean by that is we haven't been really able to count on pass catching from Cook this season. I mean, there's been a variety of different circumstances that have helped facilitate this, including injury. Against Baltimore, one would expect that the Vikings will turn to their feature back more often this week, as maybe even in the passing game. But can we count on Dalvin Cook? He's just 7.7, good price tag for him. The ownership's not particularly high at maybe 12 to 15%, something like that. I think that this is an interesting spot here for Cook. Can you trust him given the reputation of the Ravens defense?
Yeah, and I think the reputation doesn't match their actual output this season either. So that, I mean, he has that going for him. The workload hasn't been as affected as I would have thought with Madison playing super well. Cook came back and just has dominated touches. I like Dalvin for tournaments for sure. And I'm kind of hoping the matchup does drive his ownership down, because I don't think it's a typically imposing one. And like you said, I think the reputation precedes them a little bit there.
The position just not very exciting overall. I mean, we're already stretching pretty thin here for reasons to like Dalvin Cook. Kamara at 8.2. This ownership probably needs to get a little bit higher than 10% right now. I think that just because the matchup against Atlanta isn't particularly scary, should lead to people to want to go to that comfort. There's not a lot of comfortable options, is the way what I'm trying to say here, Tuttle. I think Kamara is pretty comfortable, but then of course you look at, well, we're going to be led by Simeon at quarterback, and then we've also got Taysom Hill and Mark Ingram lurking at the goal line to try to steal some of the thunder here from Kamara. I mean, we've seen Kamara have huge touchdown games with guys like Taysom around. The question is, are we really going to let that affect our decision making here and our projections, more importantly, when it comes to New Orleans against the Falcons, who otherwise are a good matchup?
I mean, if you don't let that, then you should at least let the role change that Kamara's seen this season play into your projections and ownership, right? Like, he's turned into the grinder that we don't want him to turn into him. We want him to be a pass catching back. We want that to be his biggest role. That has not been the case. He's been a guy that just is lugging around carries, and now he has Mark Ingram to compete with in that sense too. So he went from a guy that was probably getting 90% of the backfield touches to a guy that's probably going to get closer to 70%, which is a pretty big hit when you're looking at this price point. So yeah, like I think it's a tremendous matchup. I see why people would want to play him. I would not be surprised if he has a 30-point game here. But I think there are plenty of reasons to not like him in this spot too.
It's becoming clear the elderly arm of Drew Brees noodling around throwing dump offs to Kamara was potentially aiding his fantasy production. That doesn't mean that there's not big games left in the tank here. We will definitely see them. It's just going to be a little bit harder to find confidence that it's on any particular week, more so than another one when it comes to Kamara. I'm not discouraging his use whatsoever, though, because I do think that there is the upside that still exists. Okay, speaking of not excited, Josh Jacobs, Elijah Mitchell, who is both questionable and now facing potential Jeff Wilson return. And of course, Hasty is good enough that on any particular game, if Mitchell is not 100%, could steal some looks. Zach Moss also, I guess the only real question mark here with Zach Moss is the fact that he's in a split backfield. But against Jacksonville, the spot's pretty good for him. Do any of these guys give you any kind of confidence here? I'll throw Chase Edmonds in there too.
No, no confidence at all in any of these guys. So like I'll see people, and this is a weekly thing. I'll see analysts quoting or sharing Buffalo's backfield splits and workloads, and it changes. Like you can't take 1 week and look at it and just assume that Zach Moss is the guy. It's possible he's the guy again this week, but they changed how they use their running backs so often. What Moss was inactive in week 1, right? And now he's like the next week he was very heavily involved. And I don't want to say it's game plan initiated because it doesn't seem like that. It doesn't seem like it has anything to do with game plan or opponent. It's kind of just almost like a feel thing. So I want to say Moss is a good play because the matchup's there. I'll probably have some exposure to him, but I'm not going to be surprised if Singletary comes in and is the guy that leads the backfield in touches. As far as these other guys kind of in the similar price range, I think it's worth mentioning, and I don't think it's a big issue this week, but with Elijah Mitchell, we do have to check the actives list in that game with Jeff Wilson coming back. If Wilson's active, I don't expect him to come in and have some sort of huge role. But Mitchell's literally seen 100% of the early down work for San Francisco. So any sort of reduction in that role does hurt him a little bit. So I would keep an eye out on inactives, which we won't know obviously before the game's locked because that's a later game. But Wilson being active would scare me a little bit with Eli Mitchell.
I mean, of course, if he's healthy enough to be back, I'm expecting Shanahan to just put him back into a role that is definitely not something we want to see for fantasy. I expect we'll see more of a split duty backfield like we used to see in San Francisco once we get more backs in the mix here for that team. Okay, Tuttle, I'm tired of talking about running backs here. None of these guys are particularly exciting. We have to put 2 in the lineup. And it's probably good for tournaments that we're not going to have a lot of consolidation on the ownership, but it is worth noting that the confidence level in any particular play is lower than usual, which is probably why we'll see a lot of 4 wide receiver builds this week. And you could probably use a 4 wide receiver build when you go play in the DFS OGs League on FanDuel. You can go to the Rotogrinders website and find a link to that particular contest. Go play against Beer Makers Fan, Head Chopper, and Notorious. Again, get to the RG homepage, rotogrinders.com, find the link, go play against those guys, kick their asses. All right, let's talk about wide receiver total. I mentioned Hunter Renfrow before. I'm even without we don't have a particularly aggressive target share projection for him. He's still coming out as chalk, depending on how much higher people want to go than the 19-20% that we're currently projecting. You can see this projected ownership go a little bit higher. It's not that I think he's absorbent at chalk. It's just that there's really not that many other cheap places to go that we're sure of at this exact moment. So do you think Renfrow is going to be one of the top 4 or 5 owned guys? And do you think that that's merited?
Yes and yes. It's hard to find somewhere else to put that ownership in his price range. Like maybe Tony could get some steam a little bit. Maybe if we get confirmation overnight that DeAndre Hopkins is confirmed out, Kyler Murray is playing, then we could see some of these Arizona guys rise up maybe a tiny bit. But if we don't get that news, then I just don't know where you put that ownership for sure. So yeah, I think Renfrow is a good play. I think he'll be heavily owned. And I'm trying to find somewhere else to put it. Like maybe Jalen Waddle gets massively owned, but we have him projected for 16.7% as is. And he's kind of pending some injury situations too with Tua. So it's a complicated situation to see, but so Renfrow, yeah, he's going to be owned. He's a very stable entity that potentially lacks upside, but he'll be owned.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to dismiss the play altogether here. It's good salary saver, definitely pretty safe in terms of target share projection here. But the problem is, if you're saying he's going to get more, you're really saying that he wasn't in 2 wide receiver sets at all before, which is not true. I looked at Sports Info Solutions, and in 2 wide receiver sets, he was out there for probably 2/3 of the amount that someone like Henry Ruggs was. So it's really not a situation where I think you can expect Renfrow to just gain a bunch of snaps. He was averaging something around 58% of snaps before. I think you'll probably see that again. I think you'll see the target share pretty similar. I think, maybe they trust Zay Jones less. Maybe that's how you're going to bump up the target share for Renfrow here. But I really don't think that this is some massive change for him in his role. But I still think the price and target share merits some looks. Jarvis Landry. Okay, so talk about this one. We've seen him get target share way above where we're projecting him now, and he's already at 20% owned. Do you think that this is going to be a spot where we're going to see some of the upside we haven't seen in quite some time for Landry?
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, we've had the spot already so many times this season too, right? Where we didn't really have to worry about Odell. And you could make the argument that who's ever replacing him, Hollywood Higgins, is like a 1-for-1 replacement at this point, at least in terms of target share and projecting that. So like I don't know if I see massive upside with Landry. I think he's a solid play. But again, this is a team that wants to run the ball early and often as much as they can. And if they are able to do that, then we're not going to see a very good game out of Landry. He's one of those he's very similar to Renfrow. Just a very fine, stable option that probably lacks a little bit of upside, I think, just because of the offense he's in, but he's a good play.
Yeah, and the ownership's going to be there for both of these guys just simply because of their roster construction benefits. It's easy to get their median projection wise to get them into an optimizer's viewpoint of a good lineup. And then you're also going to look at the relative floor of these guys on a PPR site like DraftKings and say, yep, we can go ahead and feel confident that there's going to be a floor here too. So the question is those ceilings, and I think that's really where you have a decision point in your tournaments. No questions about the ceiling of Stephon Diggs and Tyreek Hill. Both these guys are going to be popular at the high end of the pricing tier. Tuttle, do you have a particular favorite between these 2 guys, both in matchups that I would consider at the very least beatable, and in the case of Jacksonville, just one of the best you can find?
Yeah, I do think Tyreek will probably come out the higher owned option, even though you do have some concerns, at least with pace of game. I mean, he's coming up a massive target game. his price tag decreased. He's too cheap for what he is. So I do think Tyreek was probably going to come out as the higher owned option here on DraftKings. And Diggs hasn't really shown, I'm still kind of used to the last season Diggs, and I like that version of Stephon Diggs better. But he hasn't shown like consistency or upside yet this year, which is kind of why I like this matchup. Because I'm kind of into the theories of if you're playing a team that's absolutely terrible and you can do anything you want against them, it's a good time to feed your stars and kind of get the confidence back up. So I like both. I think Hill's going to be the higher owned option, but I think these two guys both have tremendous ceilings, and I'd like the idea of playing them both if you can, which I'm not sure is going to be the typical lineup construction. So I guess that's one way you could potentially get different, is by jamming both those guys in there despite their higher price tags.
Yeah, it is for sure going to be two of the most popular ways to find like the mega upside wide receiver ceilings. The cheaper ways, or say the mid-tier ways that you're going to see outside of the first two guys we mentioned, are Amari Cooper, Jalen Waddle, and then I have a question mark about T. Higgins. Are we going to see Higgins up here in the same tier as these other guys, the way that it's projected now, or are people just going to continue to look in another direction when it comes to the 5 to 6K price range?
I think probably another direction. He's a guy that models love across the board and kind of comes in lower owned than what the models say they will. And that's kind of a weekly thing with him. And I don't think that's going to differ this week. I mentioned like Kadarius Toney could see a spike, increase in ownership around his price range. Devontae Smith, another guy, even though he much tougher matchup, coming off a terrible week, but he could soak up some of that ownership as well. So I think T is likely to drop, I guess, a little bit from the projected ownership that we got here.
Feel good about Cooper. Cooper technically almost falls in that same category, like because he keeps getting priced so cheaply. Like his ownership just keeps rocketing up here, and it's not quite where we see the ownership every single week. But do you believe that Cooper against Denver is still going to merit the ownership here, or is this another guy that we could start flipping out for some of the guys you just mentioned?
If Cooper's chalk, let me go the other way. That's pretty much always my take with him. The thing with him is too, like, often injured. He had to leave for a few plays at the end of last week as well, before he caught his touchdown. And I kind of jokingly said this to Davis Maddock on Twitter, but it's also kind of true. He's now getting a quarterback that doesn't throw him the ball, that values Dalton Schultz more than Amari Cooper, at least to this point in the season. Is that possible to change? Certainly. Certainly possible to change, but the target share has not been there with Dak under center. So if Mari's projecting his chalk, and I think he will be chalk, especially if we see CeeDee Lamb out, which is, believe CeeDee is currently questionable. If CeeDee is out, Amari's ownership, I think, is going to rise. And as weird as this sounds, I might like Amari less in that scenario, just both due to projected ownership increasing in that spot. And also, I think you would draw the tougher cornerback matchup, which I know we don't care a whole lot about, but it is easier for a defense to focus on a receiver when the other star receiver's out. That's for sure.
Denver might be the one spot where you look at their secondary as a whole and say, well, okay, maybe this is a tougher spot, but we're not looking at individual defenders anymore. Total. What year is it? Okay. Hey, Mecole Hardman, let's talk about this guy. So he's 3.9. I mean, look, the Chiefs haven't been getting it done, and I can understand why the price tag is going down. Is the ownership gonna follow this? Because we're at like 13% now. I would really love him to be low owned at 3 point. I mean, it's not going to happen at 3.9, but this is definitely a situation where one of these games is going to come for him. Like Mahomes cannot continue to play like this. I don't think Mahomes is the problem. There's been a lot of bad luck happening in some of these games. Some of the pace concerns, like we saw last week, have gotten in the way of big scoring production for Kansas City. Is it Hardman week?
He won't go low owned, like you said. He won't be massive chalk though either. That's not going to happen. So the thing is, if you look, like, he got the touches and he got the targets last week. The thing is, if you looked at, like, if you watched the game at all, or then looked at the snap rates after, his snap rate decreased. It was a huge cluster after Tyreek and after Kelsey. which has typically kind of been the case with Kansas City. Those are the two guys you can trust on a weekly basis. Mecole had kind of carved his role out as kind of the third guy. And I would still project him as the third guy in terms of target share. But if you like, they're going to mix in Josh Gordon, who has looked just completely washed. But if Josh Gordon gets 40% snap rate again this week, that's definitely not a good thing for Mecole Hardman because they're still mixing in DeMarcus Robinson. I think Byron Pringle saw the most snaps he's seen last week that he has all season. That's not a good thing for Mecole Hardman. So he's always kind of just like a big play guy, and if he hits one, you're really excited. But it's tough to envision him getting a ton of volume in the spot.
Yeah, the yards per route run not looking strong here this season for a guy like Hardman. There's a couple of reasons you just mentioned where that is no guarantee to go up, but I do still think that there's at least one big game in the bag for him this season. This week may or may not be that particular opportunity. Jamar Chase has had plenty of those big weeks this season, checking in around 12% right now. Any other big names that as you scroll down between 8 and 12% that you think are just sort of lying in wait for the monster, for the 35 point spot? Marquise Brown. Tell us who it is, Tuttle. Is there anyone down here that you feel particularly confident in could jump up above their ownership?
Marquise Brown you mentioned it. That's the spot, or that's the guy for me that could increase in ownership. He's been honestly good this year and consistent, way more consistent than what we grew used to last season. So Marquise Brown, I think, and then I keep mentioning Kadarius Toney, but him for sure as well. Just with all the absence and targets they have with New York, like they have to throw it to somebody. And I know the draft Twitter was against the Giants drafting him this season. And not defending the draft pick, but he's looked good. He's looked good. So Toney would be the other guy that I could see increasing ownership wise.
He certainly was flashing the ability that we would like to see out of a guy like this. If you do give him a lot of target volume, 10 for 189 is nothing to laugh at. Dallas isn't a tremendous defense, but this is the NFL. And if he's going to be given a lot of opportunity, forget whether or not he can get 189 yards on it. You show me 13 targets and I'll show you a guy at 5.2 that I'm interested in regardless of ownership. And I don't think the ownership, unless I'm missing something, is going to get absorbently high on him. All right. We could continue to spin our wheels with more options here, but I think we've named the guys that should be the highest owned. Unless you think I'm missing somebody, I asked about Marquise Brown. You think he could maybe get up a little bit higher? You mentioned Devontae Smith. Maybe he could get up a little bit higher. Is there anyone who's just in like no man's land right now that really should be considered the chalk this week, or do I have it pegged pretty good?
Not considered the chalk, but Brian Edwards would be a guy that I could see.
Oof.
We mentioned the Renfro projection, pretty similar spot honestly in terms of if you think Ruggs' absence means anything. Edwards is 4,100. I'm not saying I like the play personally, but I could see the reasoning for it, and I could see him. Like we did mention it's Mecole Hardman under 5K, and that's about it. Other than Renfro again as well. So Hardman, Renfro, and then Edwards would probably be the next highest owned low price guy. So just because of that, I could see him getting ownership.
Probably worth mentioning, I guess, Rondale Moore, if there was no DeAndre Hopkins and for some reason Kyler was in there, I think you could probably feel pretty good about him. I think he's like 4.5. So that's a guy who would definitely start to get a little bit of ownership if that were the case. Okay. Tuttle, RG Premium, where you can find our ownership projections, as well as a ton of other content from a lot of the most intriguing minds in the game. They are currently projecting Albert O at the top of ownership right now. Now, Okui Bunam, I believe is the way you say this name, Tuttle. If I subscribe to Rotogrinders Premium today, is this prediction of him being the highest owned tight end going to come to fruition? Or is this questionable tag going to start to drive this tag down? Well, I think personally that my first take was it wasn't going to be the stone chalk, but the more I hear people talk about it, the more I think people they're just going to feel confident about it against Dallas, and they're going to go ahead and plug him in there at the 2.6 price. What do you think?
Yeah, People love super cheap tight ends, and rightfully so. It's just like why typically pay up at this position. So yeah, I agree. He'll be chalk. 24% chalk. I don't know. I don't know. I'll tell you what, if he is, then you probably don't want to play him at 24% chalk, and try to look into little different lineup construction methods. But yeah, he'll be highest owned on DraftKings.
Well, yeah, the thing is 2.6 cannot be overstated, like how much value that provides a DraftKings lineup.
Yeah.
Like especially if you're going to project them for 9 fantasy points, which we currently do. But they don't have Noah Fant this week. And the Dallas defense is certainly not going to put the fear of God in us as far as a matchup is concerned. So even with Teddy Bridgewater being not necessarily the type of quarterback that, we're expecting to just drive skill players through the roof in terms of their production, I think we can certainly get enough production from a 2.6 guy without the primary option who's already proven the ability to get the job done and from a fantasy standpoint from time to time in his brief career. So I do think that there's going to be lots of ownership. Like you said, is it going to be 25%? Well, that remains to be seen. That's just what sort of the numbers are pointing to if you just let, models try to decide what a guy's ownership is going to be. But when you start to get the buttons pressed, maybe you start to see more Dallas Goedert, who we have repressed probably more than most. Maybe I need to up this ownership as a result of that, because we think that they're going to activate Tyree Jackson. And I think if they activate Tyree Jackson, he's going to have like most of Zach Ertz's role. And that will probably have some impact on Dallas Goedert. That's probably not a popular opinion, Tuttle. Is this insane, or should we just be getting Goddard's ownership back into double digits where it was? I'm not so sure other people see it this way.
Yeah, I think you really like Tyree Jackson because of preseason.
But I'm not the one who likes him. They're the one. The Philadelphia is the one that says they like him. He was a quarterback. He was in like the XFL. Tuttle. What do I know about Tyree Jackson? I'm listening to what Philadelphia is saying.
Yeah, I don't think it matters all that much, at least for the general public in terms of ownership projections. So Goddard, I'm trying to see where I would put him on this list. Maybe he probably hits double digits, I guess. And then, which would make you shuffle some other things around, just because he's not the same price range as some of the other guys that we'd probably take ownership from. But yeah, he'll hit double digits, I would think.
Yeah, Kasecki's in this price range. George Kittle's in this price range. Dalton Schultz in that price range. And then I guess if you wanted to make it a little bit of a stretch, you could consider Andrews as a higher price tight end. But I don't think the ownership's going to come from him. I think he'll be pretty popular. I think Darren Waller will be popular as well without Ruggs in there. Not that that's adding too much to his target share, but I do think that he's the high price option du jour for week number 9. Who else is going to be popular? It's not going to be Travis Kelce. I'll tell you that.
No, which means you should probably play him because he's not going to be popular and Tyreek is. So that should tell you something. And this is probably the lowest you have been able to get Tyreek and Kelce stacks in a long time, just FYI. So throwing that out there, because that seems like it is a thing that has been good in the past, is playing those guys. Yeah, but I agree. Kelsey's not going to be overly popular. I got nothing in terms of who's going to shoot up ownership wise. I really don't have
Arnold.
anything here.
Yeah, Dan Arnold week was last week.
Except I did the whole Dan Arnold fade, not in cash, but in some tournament lineups. And I will tell you, first half I was feeling well. I was feeling good. Second half, not so good.
Oh boy. Yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily as excited about Dan Arnold against Buffalo this week, but he has 3.4 still, so not an option I'm going to totally dissuade anyone from going to take a look at here, especially since the ownership will be considerably lower on this week. Like and subscribe to the RG podcast feed. Go ahead and check out some of the shows that are out there coming up tomorrow. You're going to see a bunch of shows on both the YouTube channel and the podcast channel leading up to lock. I think you're definitely going to want to check those out. Like and subscribe immediately. Do it now. Okay, let's get into the defense, where we are going to find the Kansas City Chiefs surprisingly towards the top here, but it's because of the price tag, right?
Yep.
Hey, look, Jordan
that drives everything on DK defense is that price tag.
Did you notice that both DraftKings lowered their price of their top defenses, and FanDuel raised them after we complained about it last week.
Yeah, they were listening to our show.
No, they definitely were not. I think probably lots of other people shared our opinion is really what happened there. But I find it coincidental that we can create an illusion of ourselves moving the needle total, even though definitely not the case. The Dolphins are moving the needle for me right now against Houston. Although Tyrod Taylor, he's no Davis Mills. Should the Dolphins be popular?
I think you hit it right there. Davis Mills is no longer, which is huge to how a defense is. Like he's a guy that's going to take sacks, be risky, make turnovers. Tyrod's kind of the opposite. He's kind of a game manager. Doesn't take a whole lot of sacks. Very mobile quarterback. Typically pretty good with protecting the ball as well. And then the other thing that would go against Miami is if Tua is out, right? Then we're looking at Jacoby, and Houston's probably going to get the ball in better field position. I can't tell you how tilting that is when you take a defense and the other team just keeps giving the ball at the 50-yard line over and over again. So yeah, I don't like Dolphins that much this week. I think hopefully no Davis Mills does drive that ownership down a little bit.
So the rest of the ownership, I do not expect to get excessive on any of these teams. If it is, it's going to become as just a little bit of a surprise to me because I don't really find another standout option relative to price in the field. I mean, obviously Buffalo against Jacksonville would be a standout if they weren't 4K. But other than that, can you give me the defense elsewhere in this field that really pops to you as someone who's going to gain a lot of traction popularity wise?
No. Panthers maybe would be like the other low price D that gets some ownership. But no. Other than that, no.
Yeah, 2.6 is definitely a good price tag for them, but I don't know if I really truly believe that Mac Jones is a turnover machine. At least not to the degree where I would be like ultra pumped about it. But 2.6 is a nice price. You got that right. So that's why the ownership here at 6.6 is towards the top of this list. All right, Tuttle, let's get into the low owned options. Who do you have at quarterback this week? Who's a guy that you think, if you're going to play in a millionaire maker style contest or the slant or something with a lot of people, we love these guys at the top here in most formats, but do we like anybody under 5% even at the quarterback position that we think could have a 25 plus point game?
Yeah, we talked about him a little bit already. Derek Carr would be that guy for me. He's the guy that's the lower price. And then Justin Herbert, again, is somebody we talk about all the time. Not to keep going back to the same guys over and over again, but that really is it. I guess the semi-interesting thing, I don't know how interesting, but like PJ Walker, maybe if Sam Darnold is a no-go, which kind of sounds like it. It sounds like from the last tweet I saw, and you might be more up to date, was that Darnold's probably going to be active, but more as an emergency because his shoulder is almost more of a worry at this point than the concussion. It's like maybe PJ Walker, DJ Moore gambles, because I don't think Walker is really much of a downgrade, if at all, from Darnold. And we've seen Darnold put up some decent numbers in this offense at times. So like maybe there's a feisty tout for you would be PJ Walker, but
that's aggressive. I'll put it to you that way. Like we're hitting a lot of XFL guys on this show today, Tuttle. I can't say that I love PJ Walker, although the price you mentioned, price tag wise, that can do a little bit for you.
Walker versus Jordan Love at 10% ownership. If you think Love gets to 10% ownership,
I mean, I'd probably take Walker, but it's not like because I love it. I would say that most of the guys that I'm looking at are towards the top of the list here on this week. But if I wanted to try to make, use my imagination, like to where is there a four touchdown performance waiting in the wings? It's if this Baltimore and Minnesota game gets out of control, I'm almost for sure going to have Lamar in that situation. But if I wanted to get the other side of it in a massive tournament and hope for the best, Kirk Cousins could be a player who has predictable target options and could have, a really big game as he's done in the past. It's not something I would prefer to do on the road here, but I just wanted to, list out somebody who has the kind of upside at low ownership, I'm definitely not going to do it. I'm going to stick more towards this top range this week. Who do you got at running back?
So before I go to running back, I just had this massive galaxy brain thought. What if, it's a huge what if PJ Walker unlocks Robbie Anderson? This is the Robbie Anderson week with PJ Walker under center. What if that happened? Everything would explode. Things would go wild. I am definitely throwing a lineup like that into the Millie Maker just because I have to at this point. But anyways,
if you make the top 10 with that lineup, I will take a piece of this hat and eat it next week on the show.
Well, you know who you can bring it back with too.
Sure.
Your favorite, one of your favorite players.
Tell the people.
Nelson Aguilar.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I'll eat an even bigger piece of the hat if that is the actual combination that gets it done.
Oh my god! Let's get into PJ Walker, Robbie Anderson, Nelson Aguilar. Look at that team. All right,
that is definitely the worst thing that's ever been said on DFS show ever. Okay, let's get into the running back position.
It's ugly, and because we have very suppressed ownership, it's hard to find a low end guy that is under 5% that's actually going to have any sort of role.
Look, I'm not going to say Christian McCaffrey because he's probably going to be limited in this matchup here. But I will say Aaron Jones, right? What's Aaron Jones?
That was the guy I had written down.
Yeah, let's just agree on this one and move on. If you're talking about, I was talking about it in chat earlier this week. Like Devontae Adams' 35% unicorn target share is almost directly the result of like a unique and elite chemistry with Aaron Rodgers. That cannot happen. Maybe it could happen. Maybe they try to force feed him 35%. But I really don't believe it at all. And I don't think that these other wide receivers are going to be able to earn enough targets. And I do think that's going to create opportunities for Aaron Jones in the passing game to get just a couple of extra targets. I mean, that's a stretch in terms of actually baking it into a projection. But in terms of a tournament, I think that that's something you could lean on as a reason to like a guy even more, especially if you're making stacks of this game. But even if you're not, I do think Aaron Jones is a play that's not going to be high enough owned compared to his potential change in role. Anybody else here, running back?
I just wanted the guy I had before I refreshed, who was a little bit lower, was highlighting Dalvin Cook, who we talked about. We talked a little bit about Zach Moss, but again, all these guys are kind of eating at least some sort of ownership. Javonte Williams, like maybe this is the week that a Denver running back, like they've actually been decent, but again, if you just gave the split workload to one guy, these guys would be amazing plays. That's not going to happen unless there's an injury, and there's no indication that there's going to happen unless there's an injury. But Javonte Williams, maybe. Like if you're looking for guys under 5K that I would actually play that are then also under 5% ownership, it would be Javonte, I guess.
Yeah, not a lot to work with here, especially as the weeks get a little bit shorter like they are with these bye weeks. Just not quite as many places to turn at the really low rungs of ownership. How about at the wide receiver position? The exception to that is almost always here at this spot. And I think this is probably the place to do it again this week. Give me your favorite under 8%.
I mean, other than Robbie Anderson and Nelson Aguilar. So the Bronco wide receivers for sure here, right? If we think Akue Boonham's going to be as heavily owned as he is, Jerry Jeudy, we have projected for 5.6% ownership. Cortland Sutton, I believe, is below that because he's got the higher price tag of the two. 4.7 per. Like these guys are decent. Like they're not bad options. They really aren't. Denver's very conservative, which is the biggest issue. Is if they just grind the clock. And now that there's targets to spread between the two, that both Jeudy and Sutton are finally healthy, like that definitely hurts because they cannibalize each other a little bit. But I would not be surprised if one of them popped off. And I do like those guys. CD Lamb would be the other guy if he's active. We have him about 6% ownership, but especially if Amari is going to be chalk, very, very strong leverage play there. And then Brian Edwards was the other guy. Again, I don't love it as a play, but if you think Renfro is going to be high owned, if you think Waller is going to be high owned, Edwards is potentially worth looking into at lower ownership.
No one's playing Justin Jefferson again this week, so go ahead and dial him up if you're looking for some action there in that Minnesota game. And people still don't like playing Adam Thielen too. Well, both of those guys just could absolutely get to the place where you need him to get 25 plus to win a daily fantasy tournament. Okay, let's get into the tight end position. Lots of good options here this week. So I think that's going to mean lots of guys who are a little bit lower owned than we might normally expect for the quality of their plays. Do you have a particular favorite here at this spot?
Travis Kelce. He's going to get some ownership, but probably not as much. Like, he's coming off a primetime game where he just looked terrible, like beyond terrible. Words cannot describe how bad he looked. I was tilted tweeting about him. He has not looked great the past few games, really, but prior to last week, you're looking at double-digit targets in 3 straight games. He's a guy that's going to get a lot of targets at this position. So Kelce would be the guy that has tremendous upside, and it's really a good spot if you're using him over Tyreek Hill to his leverage.
Since the Falcons' offense stinks, I'm not going to say Kyle Pitts, but I'm going to close the show out with a potentially sharp take. How about Dalton Schultz? No Blake Jarwin out there, and now we've got a situation where maybe the cornerback situation being one of the very few we should even care about in the league, with how good that secondary is for Denver. Maybe that means that Dak's got to go to the middle of the field just a little bit more in between the 20s for Dalton Schultz. And of course, he's always a threat in the red zone. At the star, not too bad if you want to get very different for a guy who could get into the 15 to 25 fantasy point range, as he's done a couple times this year already. Tuttle, that's going to do it for the ownership report in week number 9. Best of luck in all of your contests, and to everyone out there watching. For Rotogrinders.com, I'm Chris Gimino. We'll be back again week 10. Go win something.